Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Welcome to Sleepy Crone, where history's quiet tales gently carry you into dreamland. Tonight begins our peaceful journey through the legendary Trojan War, a monumental conflict that shaped ancient Greek mythology and possibly historical reality from approximately 1194 to 1184 BCE. In Part 1, we'll softly explore the divine origins and early causes of this epic conflict, from the fateful judgment of Paris and the abduction of beautiful Helen, to the gathering of Greek forces under Agamemnon's command, all while the gods themselves chose sides in this momentous struggle. Before you drift away into peaceful sleep, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about which Greek hero you find most fascinating, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. So cozy up, close your eyes, and let these gentle whispers from ancient Greece lull you into restful sleep. If you're new here, welcome to the Sleepy Crone family. The Trojan War, later known as one of history's most legendary conflicts, began not with the thunderous clash of bronze weapons or the screams of dying men, but with a celebration, a divine wedding feast that would plant the seeds of conflict and tragedy across the ancient world. Picture yourself transported back to the Bronze Age, when the world was young and the boundaries between myth and reality blurred like morning mist. In this distant time, approximately 3,000 years ago, mighty civilizations flourished across the Mediterranean basin. Egypt, under the rule of powerful pharaohs from the New Kingdom, controlled vast territories from Lower Nubia to the Levant. The Hittite Empire, centered in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, rivaled Egypt in power and influence. Their capital of Hattusa, standing as a testament to their architectural prowess, in Mesopotamia. The Assyrian Empire was expanding its reach, while Babylon maintained its ancient prestige as the heir to millennia of civilization. These great powers traded, fought, and negotiated with one another, creating a complex web of alliances and rivalries that stretched across the known world. But perhaps nowhere was the interplay of divine and mortal more evident than in the Aegean world, where the Mycenaean civilization flourished on mainland Greece and the Minoan culture had left its mark on Crete. Here, in a landscape of sun-drenched islands and vine-covered hills, the stage was set for the greatest story ever told. Palace of King Peleus gleamed with golden radiance on his wedding day, its marble columns reflecting the warm Mediterranean sun. This mortal hero, distinguished in battle and beloved by his people, had achieved something that seemed impossible. He had won the heart of Thetis, a silver-footed sea nymph whose beauty rivaled that of the immortals themselves. Thetis was no ordinary sea spirit. She was one of the Nereids, the 50 daughters of the sea god Nereus, and her divine nature made her both beautiful and powerful. Her silver feet, which gave her the epithet by which she was known, could carry her across the ocean's surface faster than any ship, and her wisdom was said to surpass that of many Olympians. Not since creation's earliest days had such a union between mortal and divine taken place. The very cosmos seemed to hold its breath as preparations for the wedding unfolded. Golden pavilions were erected on the shores of Thessaly, where land met sea in perfect harmony. The finest musicians in Greece gathered to provide entertainment, while the most skilled cooks prepared a feast worthy of the gods themselves. And indeed, the gods themselves descended from their lofty palaces atop Mount Olympus to attend this magnificent celebration. Zeus, master of thunder and sovereign of the gods, arrived with all the majesty befitting the ruler of both mortals and immortals. Lightning flickered around his temples as he took his place at the head table, his presence alone enough to guarantee the sanctity of the union. Beside him sat Hera, queen of heaven and protector of marriage, resplendent in robes of deepest purple trimmed with gold. Her peacocks strutted nearby, their iridescent feathers catching the light like jewels. Despite her often tempestuous relationship with her husband, Hera genuinely delighted in witnessing a proper marriage ceremony, and she had blessed this union with particular enthusiasm. Poseidon, lord of the seas and brother to Zeus, brought treasures from the ocean's depths, pearls the size of grapes, coral formations that glowed with inner light, and shells that sang with the voices of sirens when the wind passed through them. His gift to the couple was a promise that their ships would always find safe harbor, and that no storm would claim their lives while they were together. Apollo, god of music, poetry, and prophecy, strummed his golden lyre with fingers that moved too quickly for mortal eyes to follow. The melodies that flowed from his instrument were sweeter than any earthly music, causing flowers to bloom out of season and birds to gather in great clouds overhead, adding their voices to the divine symphony. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister and goddess of the hunt, had set aside her usual shyness around crowds to attend the festivities. She brought with her a gift of eternal health for any children the couple might have, though she warned cryptically that great gifts often came with great prices. Athena, gray-eyed goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, observed the proceedings with her characteristic intensity. Her mind was already turning over the implications of this union, for she had inherited from her father Zeus the ability to see farther into the future than most, and what she saw there made her thoughtful indeed. Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, whose very presence made the flowers more fragrant and the wine more intoxicating, smiled with genuine pleasure at the love match before her. She had not needed to intervene to bring Peleus and Thetis together. Their love was pure and true, born of mutual respect and genuine affection rather than divine manipulation. Dionysus, god of wine and celebration, ensured that the wedding feast would be remembered for its magnificence. The finest wines from every corner of Greece flowed like rivers, yet no one became unpleasantly drunk. His divine influence ensured that the wine brought only joy and merriment, heightening the pleasure of the occasion without clouding anyone's judgment. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, had blessed the feast with abundance. The tables groaned under the weight of every delicacy imaginable: roasted peacocks, stuffed with fruits and nuts, honeyed cakes shaped like flowers, bread so light it seemed to float, and fruits so perfect they might have been carved from precious stones. Hephaestus, the divine smith, had crafted special gifts for the occasion. For Peleus, he had made a sword whose blade would never dull and whose edge could cut through any armor. For Thetis, he had created a crown of living silver that flowed like water but held its shape like metal, adjusting its size and design to match her moods. All the Olympians had come to celebrate this union, all save one. Eris, goddess of discord and strife, had received no invitation. Her absence was not an oversight, it was a deliberate choice. Wedding planners throughout Greece knew better than to invite Eris to any celebration, for her very presence could turn joy to jealousy, laughter to argument, and love to hate. Gifts were chaos and conflict, and no one wanted such energies at a wedding. But Eris learned of her exclusion through the whispered conversations of the winds, who carried news to her as they carried it to all the gods. Her heart, already predisposed to darkness, burned with bitter resentment. If she could not share in the celebration, she would ensure that the revelers remembered her nonetheless. As the feast reached its peak, with gods and mortals alike lost. In wine and merriment, the very air seemed to shimmer with contentment and joy. Toasts were raised to the happy couple, blessings were spoken in a dozen divine languages, and it seemed as though nothing could mar the perfection of the day. It was then that Eris struck. A golden apple suddenly appeared on the banquet table, rolling slowly between the goblets and plates as though it had materialized from the very air itself. The fruit was unlike any that grew on earthly trees. It gleamed with an inner light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and its surface was smooth as glass, unmarked by any blemish or imperfection. Upon its lustrous skin, words had been inscribed, in letters that seemed to shift and dance before the eyes of those who looked upon them. In Greek, they read, Tau Kappa Alpha Lambda Lambda Y Sigma Tau, to the fairest. The script was beautiful, flowing like living metal across the apple's surface, but the Message itself was like a spark thrown into dry tinder. The celebration faltered as every eye in the great hall turned toward the golden apple. Conversations died mid-sentence. Music faded away, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The gods recognized the handiwork of Eris immediately, and several of them muttered curses under their breath. But it was too late. 3 goddesses had already risen from their seats, each convinced beyond doubt that the apple was meant for. Hera, queen of the gods and wife of Zeus, stood with all the dignity and authority that her position commanded. Her claim was clear. Who could be fairer than the queen of heaven herself? Her beauty was the beauty of authority and power, refined through countless centuries of rule. When she moved, it was with the grace of one born to command, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of divine law. Athena rose next, her gray eyes flashing with intelligence and determination. Her beauty was of a different sort, the beauty of wisdom made manifest, of strategy and cunning given perfect form. She had sprung fully grown from Zeus's head, born from pure thought, and her claim to fairness rested not just on physical beauty, but on the perfection of mind and spirit that she embodied. Last came Aphrodite, and as she stood, the very air around her seemed to shimmer with desire and longing. Her beauty was the standard against which all other beauty was measured. She was love itself given form, passion made flesh, the driving force behind every romance and the inspiration for every poet's verse about love. If anyone deserved be called the fairest, surely it was the goddess of beauty herself. Each of these 3 goddesses believed with absolute certainty that she was the rightful owner of the golden prize, and none would yield her claim. The apple had been crafted specifically to appeal to their particular forms of vanity, Hera's pride in her position, Athena's confidence in her perfection, and Aphrodite's certainty of her beauty. The dispute quickly grew heated. Voices that could shake mountains when raised in anger began to rise, and the very foundations of Olympus trembled. The other gods and goddesses drew back, recognizing the danger of the situation. When these 3 goddesses quarreled, the results could be catastrophic. The 3 rivals appealed to Zeus to judge between them, but the king of gods was far too wise to make such a perilous choice. He had not ruled Olympus for millennia by making unnecessary enemies, and he knew that no matter which goddess he chose, the other 2 would never forgive him. Even Zeus, with all his power, dared not name one goddess fairer than the others, especially not when his own wife was among the contenders. Instead, Zeus made a decision that seemed wise at the time, but would prove to have far-reaching consequences. He would delegate this impossible choice to a moral judge, someone who would bear the responsibility and the consequences of the decision. The chosen judge would be Paris, a young prince who at that time was living as a shepherd on the slopes of Mount Ida, far from the splendor and intrigues of divine society. Paris was, though he did not know it, the son of King Priam of Troy, the heir to one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. Paris had been born under the shadow of prophecy. His mother, Queen Hecuba, had experienced a dream so vivid and terrifying that it haunted her waking hours. In this dream, she gave birth not to a child, but to a flaming torch that consumed the entire city of Troy, reducing its proud towers to ash and its people to slaves or corpses. When the royal seer was consulted about this ominous dream, his interpretation was unambiguous. The child Hecuba carried would bring about the destruction of Troy. The only way to prevent this catastrophe was to ensure that the child never lived to fulfill the prophecy. King Priam, faced with this terrible choice, made the decision that seemed necessary for the survival of his city and his people. When Paris was born, the infant was given to a trusted servant with orders to take him to Mount Ida and expose him there. The child would either die from the elements, removing the threat to Troy, or perhaps the gods would intervene if they had other plans for him. But fate had other plans indeed. A kindly shepherd named Agelaus found the abandoned infant and, moved by compassion, took him home to raise as his own son. The shepherd and his wife had long desired children, but had been blessed with none, and they saw the baby's survival as a gift from the gods. Paris grew up among the flocks on Mount Ida, learning the simple but noble arts of shepherding. He became skilled at reading the weather, finding lost sheep, and protecting his charges from wolves and other predators. His adoptive parents told him nothing of his true origins, and he grew up believing himself to be the son of a shepherd, content with his simple life. A young man who would one day be revealed as a prince of Troy was remarkable even in his humble circumstances. He was tall and handsome, with the bearing of nobility that even rough clothing and simple circumstances could not disguise. His intelligence was evident in his quick grasp of any new skill, and his natural leadership showed itself in the way other young shepherds looked to him for guidance. Most importantly, for the role he was about to play, Paris had developed a reputation for fairness. When disputes arose between shepherds over grazing rights or the ownership of stray animals, they often asked Paris to settle the matter. His judgments were always considered thoughtful and impartial, taking into account all sides of an argument. Before reaching a decision, it was this reputation for fair judgment that brought him to the attention of the gods, and particularly to Zeus, who needed someone to make the impossible choice between the three goddesses. Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger of the gods, was dispatched to Mount Ida to bring the three rival goddesses to Paris. The god of boundaries and travelers had the delicate task of explaining the situation to a simple shepherd without revealing too much about the cosmic significance of his choice. When Hermes arrived on Mount Ida, he found Paris tending his flock in a meadow dotted with wildflowers. The young shepherd was playing a simple reed pipe, its melodies echoing across the hillside and keeping the sheep calm and content. The music stopped abruptly when Hermes appeared, his winged sandals touching down lightly on the grass. Paris had never seen a god before, but there was something about Hermes that immediately marked him as more than mortal. Perhaps it was the way the light seemed to gather around him, or the fact that his feet left no impression on the soft earth, or simply the aura of power that clung to him like an invisible cloak. "Greetings, young shepherd," Hermes said, his voice carrying easily across the meadow, despite its conversational tone. "I come with a task for you, if you are willing to accept it." Paris set down his pipe and stood, his natural courtesy overcoming his amazement. "I am honored by your presence, Lord, though I confess I do not understand why a god would seek out a simple shepherd." Hermes smiled at the young man's honesty. "Sometimes the simplest minds make the clearest judgments. I am here because three great goddesses have need of an impartial judge, and Zeus himself has chosen you for this task." Before Paris could respond to this astounding statement, the air around them began to shimmer and glow. Three figures appear in the meadow, and even though Paris had no experience of divine beings, he knew immediately that he was in the presence of the most powerful goddesses of Olympus. The first to approach was Hera, and her presence was like standing in the shadow of a mountain. She radiated authority and power, and when she looked at Paris, he felt as though she could see into his very soul. Her beauty was magnificent, but intimidating, the beauty of a queen who had never doubted her right to rule. "Young Paris," she said, her voice carrying the authority of countless royal proclamations, "you have been chosen to settle a dispute of great importance. Before you is a choice that will shape the fate of gods and mortals alike." Athena stepped forward next, and Paris was struck by the keenness of her gaze. Her gray eyes seemed to take in everything at once: the lay of the land, the position of the sheep, the strength of his staff, the quality of his clothing. It was as though she was automatically analyzing everything around her, cataloging details and forming strategies. "The task before you requires wisdom, young shepherd," she said, her voice crisp and clear as a bell. "Consider carefully before you choose, for your decision will have consequences far beyond this hillside." Finally, Aphrodite approached, and Paris felt his heart begin to race. Where Hera had been intimidating and Athena analytical, Aphrodite was simply overwhelming. Her beauty was not just visual, It affected all the senses. The air around her seemed warmer and more fragrant, the colors of the flowers at her feet more vivid, the sound of the breeze more musical. "Sweet Paris," she said, her voice like honey and wine mixed together, "you have been given a great honor. 3 goddesses stand before you, each claiming to be the fairest. You must choose which of us deserves this golden apple." Hermes produced the apple of discord, and as Paris looked upon it, he understood for the first time the magnitude of what was being asked of him. The fruit seemed to pulse with significance, and he could sense that his choice would echo far beyond this moment. The gods had given him the sight to behold their true forms without being consumed by their glory, but this blessing also meant that he could see the full power and personality of each goddess. He saw Hera's strength and authority, Athena's wisdom and strategic mind, and Aphrodite's overwhelming beauty and passion. But the goddesses were not content to let their natural attributes speak for themselves. Each was eager to win the golden apple, and each offered Paris a gift beyond mortal imagination if he would choose her. Here spoke first, stepping closer to the young shepherd. Her offer was direct and appealing to anyone with ambition. "Choose me as the fairest, Paris, and I will make you a king among kings. You shall rule not just a single city, but an empire that spans the known world. Power will be yours, the power to command armies, to make laws that will be obeyed across continents, to build monuments that will last for eternity. Kings and emperors will bow before your throne, and your name will be spoken with reverence in every palace from Egypt to the distant lands beyond the Black Sea." As she spoke, Paris could see visions of the power she offered, vast armies marching beneath his banners, golden palaces rising at his command, tribute flowing from conquered lands to fill his treasuries. It was a dazzling prospect for a young man who had never owned anything more valuable than his shepherd's crook. Athena stepped forward next, her gray eyes gleaming with intelligence and promise. Her offer was tailored to appeal to a different aspect of human nature. "Choose me, Paris, and I will make you the wisest of all warriors. Victory will follow you in every battle, not through brute strength alone, but through the brilliance of your strategic mind. You will become the greatest general who ever lived, able to outwit any enemy and conquer any fortress. Your tactics will be studied for generations, and your name will be remembered alongside the greatest heroes of legend. Men will seek you out to learn the arts of war, and your wisdom will be as sharp as your sword." As Athena spoke, Paris saw himself leading armies with perfect strategy, conquering cities through brilliant tactics rather than mere force, and earning the respect of warriors and scholars alike. It was an appeal to the part of him that had always been curious about the world beyond his mountain pasture. Last came Aphrodite, and when she spoke, her voice seemed to wrap around him like silk. Her offer was the most personal and immediate. "What use is power or glory, sweet Paris, if your bed remains cold at night? Choose me, and I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta will be yours, a woman whose beauty surpasses even that of many goddesses, whose face could launch 1,000 ships, and whose love would make you the envy of every man who has ever drawn breath. She will love you with a passion that burns like the sun, and in her arms you will find happiness beyond anything that power or wisdom could bring." As Aphrodite made her offer, Paris felt his heart swell with longing. He saw visions of Helen, her golden hair catching the sunlight, her blue eyes sparkling with intelligence and humor, her smile that could brighten even the darkest day. The goddess showed him what their love could be like, passionate, all-consuming, the kind of love that poets sang about and heroes died for. Paris was young, perhaps no more than 20, and filled with all the passions and desires of youth. He had lived a simple life among the sheep and shepherds, where the greatest excitement was the occasional visit to the market town at the base of the mountain. The prospect of love, real, passionate, transcendent love, appealed to him far more than abstract promises of power or wisdom. What were kingdoms or battlefields compared to the promise of true love? What was the respect of armies compared to the devotion of one perfect woman? Paris had seen enough of politics and war from a distance to know that power often brought more sorrow than joy, and wisdom could make a man too aware of the world's cruelties. Without much hesitation, he stepped forward and handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, naming her the fairest of the three goddesses. The consequences of this choice were immediate. Aphrodite accepted the apple with a smile that could have melted bronze, while Hera and Athena exchanged glances that promised dire consequences for both Paris and his homeland. The queen of the gods had not become accustomed to being refused, and the goddess of wisdom was not used to having her gifts dismissed as worthless. "You have chosen wisely, beautiful Paris," Aphrodite said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "I will not forget this gift you have given me, and I will honor my promise. Helen of Sparta will indeed be yours, though the path to her may not be as simple as you might wish." Hera spoke next, her voice carrying the chill of a winter storm. "You have made your choice, young prince, for prince you are, though you know it not yet. Remember this day when the consequences of your decision come to pass." Athena's words were fewer, but no less ominous. "Wisdom spurned has a way of returning in unexpected forms. You may find that my gifts would have served you better than you can now imagine." With these cryptic warnings, the three goddesses departed, leaving Paris alone with Hermes on the mountainside. The messenger god studied the young shepherd for a moment before speaking. "You realize, of course, that you have just set in motion events that will reshape the world," Hermes said, though his tone was more conversational than accusatory. Paris looked down at his hands, which still tingled from contact with the golden apple. "I chose with my heart, Lord. Was that wrong?" "Not wrong," Hermes replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps not wise. Love is the most powerful force in the universe, young shepherd, but it is also the most dangerous. It can create as easily as it destroys, heal as readily as it wounds. The goddess promised me the love of the most beautiful woman in the world," Paris said. "Surely such a love would be worth any price." Hermes smiled sadly. "Perhaps. But consider this, if Helen of Sparta is truly the most beautiful woman in the world, do you think you will be the only man who desires her? And if she is already wed to another, as indeed she is, what do you think will happen when you claim her for your own?" Paris had no answer for these questions, and indeed, he was not given much time to ponder them. For even as they spoke, trumpets could be heard echoing across the hillsides. Not the simple horns that shepherds used to call their flocks, but the elaborate bronze trumpets used by royal messengers. A company of riders was approaching up the mountain path, their horses' hooves striking sparks from the rocky ground. At their head rode a man whose bearing and dress marked him as a noble of high rank, and behind him came a full escort of armed warriors. As they drew closer, Paris could see that the leader was an older man with gray in his beard and lines of care around his eyes. He rode with the easy authority of one born to command, and his equipment, though travel-stained, was of the finest quality. The company halted a short distance away, and the leader dismounted. He approached Paris with careful steps, his eyes studying the young shepherd's face with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "Are you the shepherd called Paris?" the nobleman asked, his voice carrying a note of barely controlled emotion. "I, Paris replied, though something in the man's manner made him suddenly uncertain of everything he had thought he knew about himself. "Then I have found what I have sought for 20 years, the man said, and tears began to flow down his weathered cheeks. "My son, I am Priam, king of Troy, and you are my heir, stolen from me by prophecy and fear, but restored to me now by the will of the gods." The revelation that he was not a simple shepherd, but a prince of Troy, one of the greatest cities in the world, should have overwhelmed Paris. Indeed, for a moment he could only stare at the man who claimed to be his father, searching for some resemblance, some sign that would confirm this astounding claim. But as he looked into Priam's eyes, He saw something that convinced him more than any physical resemblance could have. He saw love. This man had spent 20 years searching for a lost son, and the joy and relief in his face were too genuine to be feigned. The story that Priam told as they made their way down the mountain toward Troy was both heartbreaking and enlightening. He spoke of the prophecy that had forced him to abandon his newborn son, of the years of regret that had followed, of the constant searching and hoping that had never entirely ceased. "I have watched this mountainside for 2 decades, Priam said as they rode. Every year, I would send scouts to look for any sign of a child who might have survived. When reports began to reach me of a young shepherd whose wisdom and fairness were becoming legendary, whose appearance suggested noble blood, I dared to hope." Paris learned that he had many siblings, brothers and sisters, who had grown up in the palace while he tended sheep on Mount Ida. Chief among them was Hector, his older brother, already renowned as Troy's greatest warrior and defender. There was also Cassandra, gifted with prophecy, but cursed never to be believed, and many others who made up the large and close-knit royal family of Troy. As the walls of Troy came into view in the distance, Paris felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The city was even more magnificent than the stories had suggested. Its walls rose impossibly high, gleaming white stone topped with bronze battlements, while towers and palaces visible within spoke of wealth and power beyond anything he had imagined. The gates of Troy were massive constructions of bronze and iron, decorated with reliefs showing the city's history and the deeds of its heroes. As they approached, guards in gleaming armor stepped aside respectfully for their king, their eyes full of curiosity as they tried to get a good look at the prince who had returned from the dead. The people of Troy lined the streets as word of Paris's return spread throughout the city. They had heard the stories of the lost prince, and now they crowded to see him with their own eyes. Some called out blessings, others simply stared in wonder at the young man who had been raised as a shepherd, but was now revealed as heir to their throne. The palace of Priam was a marvel of architecture and decoration. Its halls were vast and high-ceilinged, supported by columns of polished marble, and decorated with frescoes depicting the deeds of gods and heroes. Gardens bloomed in courtyards where fountains played, and the sound of music and laughter echoed from various chambers. Queen Hecuba's reunion with her lost son was even more emotional than Priam's had been. The woman who had once dreamed of giving birth to a flaming torch wept tears of joy as she embraced the young man she had thought lost forever. Her maternal instincts, suppressed for 20 years, awakened with overwhelming force. "My son?" she whispered, holding his face in her hands and studying every feature. "You have your father's eyes, but my stubborn chin. And you're so tall. You are such a tiny baby. I never imagined you would grow to be such a man." The other members of the royal family welcomed Paris with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Hector, the crown prince and Troy's military commander, embraced his younger brother warmly, but with a certain reservation in his eyes. As a man of practical nature, Hector understood that Paris's return would complicate the succession and might create political tensions within the court. Cassandra's reaction was the most disturbing. The moment she saw Paris, she began to scream, not with joy or surprise, but with terror. Her gift of prophecy, unwanted and unheeded, showed her visions of what was to come. "Fire!" she shrieked, pointing at Paris with a trembling finger. "I see fire consuming Troy's walls. Brother, why have you returned to us? Take him away before it's too late." But Cassandra's fate was cruel. Though she spoke only truth, no one ever believed her prophecies. The court dismissed her warnings as madness, as they always did. The curse that Apollo had placed upon her, that she would see the future truly but never be believed, ensured that her most important prophecies would go unheeded. Paris was given apartments befitting a prince, with servants to attend him and tutors to help him learn the customs and politics of court life. The transition from shepherd to prince was not easy. The elaborate protocols of royal life were as foreign to him as the language of the gods had been. But Paris was intelligent and adaptable, and he threw himself into learning everything he could about his new position. He studied the history of Troy, learning about the great kings who had ruled before his father and the mighty deeds that had made the city famous throughout the known world. He learned about Troy's wealth, which came from its position controlling the straits that connected the Aegean Sea to the Black Sea. Every ship that wanted to pass through the Dardanelles had to pay tribute to Troy, and this steady stream of income had made the city one of the richest in the world. He studied the arts of war and diplomacy, for a prince of Troy needed to be skilled in both. Hector took personal charge of his military training, teaching him sword work and archery, cavalry tactics and siege warfare. Paris proved to be a quick learner, though he never matched his brother's natural talent for combat. More importantly, Paris learned about the complex web of alliances and enmities that connected Troy to the other powers of the ancient world. To the east lay the Hittite Empire, sometimes ally and sometimes rival. To the south were various Anatolian kingdoms, each with their own interests and ambitions. And across the Aegean Sea lay the Mycenaean Greeks, whose relationship with Troy was complicated by both trade and competition. It was during these lessons in diplomacy that Paris first heard the name Helen of Sparta, though at the time she was just one name among many in the complex genealogies of Greek royalty that he was required to memorize. Helen, he learned, was the daughter of Zeus himself and the mortal woman Leda, queen of Sparta. Her divine parentage explained her legendary beauty, which was said to surpass that of any mortal woman. She had been courted by every eligible prince in Greece before finally marrying Menelaus, who had thereby become king of Sparta. At the time, this information seemed merely academic to Paris. He was still adjusting to his new life and had no thoughts of foreign adventures. But Aphrodite had not forgotten her promise, and the seeds of destiny were already beginning to sprout. Several months after Paris's return to Troy, King Priam announced that he was planning to send a diplomatic mission to various Greek cities. The official purpose was to strengthen trade relations and discuss mutual interests. But Priam also saw it as an opportunity for Paris to gain experience in diplomacy and to see something of the world beyond Troy's walls. Paris eagerly volunteered to lead this mission. After 20 years of life confined to Mount Ida and several months in the relatively small world of Troy's court, he was hungry for adventure and new experiences. The prospect of sailing across the Aegean Sea and visiting the famous cities of Greece filled him with excitement. Priam agreed to his son's request, perhaps seeing it as a good opportunity for Paris to prove himself as a diplomat and representative of Troy. A ship was prepared, provisions were loaded, and a suitable escort of nobles and guards was assembled. As the ship prepared to depart from Troy's harbor, Cassandra appeared on the docks, her hair wild and her eyes bright with prophetic madness. She pointed at Paris and began to speak in the riddling language that marked her pronouncements. The shepherd returns to steal the wolf's mate. Fire ships will follow in his wake, and iron will ring against bronze beneath these very walls. Brother, do not go. The price of beauty is blood, and the cost of love is war. But her warnings, as always, fell on deaf ears. The crew of the ship crossed themselves and made signs against evil, but they did not understand the true meaning of her words. Paris himself felt a momentary chill, but Aphrodite's promise burned brighter in his memory than any prophetic warning. The ship set sail with favorable winds, its purple sails bellowing as it cleared Troy's harbor and turned southwest toward the Greek mainland. Paris stood at the prow, breathing the salt air and watching the dolphins that raced alongside the ship as though escorting it toward its destiny. But Paris had only one true destination in mind, though he told no one of his real intentions. While the ship would visit several Greek cities as part of its official diplomatic mission, Paris had already decided that the most important stop would be Sparta, where Helen lived as queen. During the voyage, Paris found himself thinking constantly about Aphrodite's promise. What would Helen be like? Would she truly be as beautiful as the goddess had suggested? And more importantly, would she be willing to leave her husband and kingdom for love of him? These questions consumed his thoughts as the ship sailed through the island-dotted waters of the Aegean. He had no way of knowing that at that very moment, Helen herself was experiencing strange dreams and visions, sent by Aphrodite to prepare her heart for the love that was coming. Meanwhile, in Sparta, King Menelaus was planning his own journey. He had received word that his grandfather was dying in Crete, and duty demanded that he attend the funeral rites. It seemed like perfect timing when the Trojan delegation requested permission to visit Sparta. Menelaus could receive them with proper hospitality before departing for Crete, leaving Helen to entertain the distinguished foreign guests in his absence. The arrival of the Trojan ship in Sparta's harbor caused quite a stir. It had been many years since Troy had sent such an official delegation to the Greek mainland, and the people gathered to watch as the foreign nobles disembarked. Paris, dressed in the finest robes that Troy's craftsmen could create, cut an impressive figure as he led his delegation through the streets toward the royal palace. Sparta was different from Troy in many ways. Where Troy was a bustling commercial center with high walls and crowded streets, Sparta was more austere, its buildings reflecting the military values of its people. But the palace of Menelaus was magnificent nonetheless, its halls decorated with the spoils of many successful raids and trading expeditions. Menelaus received the Trojan delegation with all the courtesy that the laws of hospitality demanded. He was a man in his 30s, strong and confident, with the bearing of a warrior who had proven himself in many battles. His welcome was genuine. He bore no particular ill will toward Troy, and he saw the visit as an opportunity to strengthen the bonds between their peoples. "Welcome to Sparta, Prince Paris," Menelaus said, clasping the younger man's hand in the traditional greeting. "Your father Priam is well regarded here, and any son of his is welcome in my halls." Paris responded with equal courtesy, though he found his attention wandering as he looked around the great hall, searching for some sign of the woman he had come so far to see. But Helen was not present at this initial reception. Royal protocol demanded that the visitors be formally welcomed and given time to refresh themselves before being presented to the Queen. It was not until the evening feast that Paris finally laid eyes on Helen of Sparta, and when he did, he understood immediately why Aphrodite had chosen her as the ultimate prize. Helen's beauty was not merely physical, though she was certainly the most physically perfect woman Paris had ever seen. Her golden hair seemed to catch and hold light like spun sunbeams. Her blue eyes were deep as mountain lakes, and her smile could have charmed the birds from the trees. But beyond her physical beauty, Helen possessed something even rarer, a perfect grace that marked every movement, every gesture, every word. When she spoke, her voice was like music. When she moved, it was like watching a dance. When she laughed, the sound was so pure and joyful that it made everyone around her want to laugh as well. Helen was not merely beautiful, she was beauty itself, the living embodiment of everything that poets tried to capture in words, and artists tried to recreate in marble and bronze. As the evening progressed, Paris found himself more and more captivated. Helen was not only beautiful, but intelligent, well-educated, and possessed of a wit that sparkled in her conversation. She spoke knowledgeably about poetry and music, asked thoughtful questions about Troy and its customs, and displayed a genuine interest in the world beyond her own kingdom. For her part, Helen found herself drawn to this handsome Trojan prince, who was so different from the Greek nobles she was accustomed to. Paris had an exotic quality that set him apart. Perhaps it was his years as a shepherd that had given him a different perspective on life, or perhaps it was simply his foreign origin. Whatever the cause, Helen found their conversations more engaging than any she had enjoyed in years. Menelaus, busy with his preparations for departure to Crete, noticed nothing unusual in the polite attention his wife paid to their distinguished guest. It was her duty as queen to ensure that visitors to Sparta were properly entertained, and Helen had always excelled at this aspect of royal life. The evening passed pleasantly, with music and dancing following the feast. Paris proved to be an accomplished dancer, and when he partnered Helen in several of the traditional Spartan dances, the other guests murmured appreciatively at how well matched they appeared. As the night drew to a close, Paris retired to the guest quarters assigned to him, but sleep eluded him. He lay awake thinking about Helen, her smile, her laughter, the way her eyes had sparkled when she spoke about her favorite poems. He found himself composing verses in his mind, trying to capture in words the effect she had had upon him, not Helen. In her own chambers, was experiencing similar sleeplessness. She told herself that it was merely the excitement of entertaining foreign guests, but in her heart she knew it was something more. There had been something about Paris' quality she could not quite name that had stirred feelings she had thought long dormant. Over the following days, as Menelaus completed his preparations, and the Trojan delegation was entertained with tours of the city and its surrounding lands, Paris and Helen found numerous opportunities to speak privately. These conversations, which began as polite exchanges between host and guest, gradually became more personal and intimate. Paris spoke of his unusual upbringing among the shepherds, of his recent discovery of his royal heritage, of his dreams and ambitions for the future. Helen told him of her life in Sparta, of the burdens and pleasures of royal duty, of her love for poetry and music that was seldom fully appreciated in militaristic Sparta. Both discovered that they had found in the other something they had been missing. Paris found in Helen a woman whose beauty was matched by her intelligence and sensitivity, while Helen found in Paris a man who appreciated her mind as much as her appearance. It was Aphrodite, of course, who was orchestrating these growing feelings. The goddess of love was keeping her promise to Paris, but she was working subtly, enhancing natural attraction rather than forcing artificial passion. The love that grew between Paris and Helen was real, even if it was encouraged by divine intervention. The critical moment came when Menelaus finally departed for Crete. As his ship disappeared over the horizon, Paris and Helen found themselves alone together in the palace gardens. It was here, surrounded by blooming flowers and the gentle sound of fountains, that they finally acknowledged what had been growing between them. "I should not say this," Paris began, his voice thick with emotion, "but I cannot leave Sparta without telling you that you have captured my heart completely. In all my dreams, I never imagined that love could be like this sudden, overwhelming, transforming everything." Helen looked into his eyes and saw there the same confusion and wonder that she felt in her own heart. "And I should not listen," she replied softly, "but I find that I cannot turn away. What is happening to us, Paris? How can feelings this strong grow so quickly?" "Perhaps," Paris said, taking her hand gently, "this is how the gods intended love, to be not a slow growth but a lightning strike, not a gentle rain, but a flood that changes the landscape forever." That night, as the rest of the palace slept, Paris and Helen walked together through the moonlit gardens, speaking of their feelings and the impossible situation they found themselves in. Both knew that Helen was married, that she had duties and obligations that bound her to Sparta. Both knew that any relationship between them would cause scandal and potentially lead to war. But love, especially love touched by divine influence, is not easily deterred by practical considerations. As the night wore on, they resolved to resist. Their feelings weakened. They began to speak not of why they should stay apart, but of how they might be together. "Come with me to Troy," Paris finally said, the words seeming to come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "Leave this cold military city and come to a place where beauty and love are appreciated, where you would be honored not just as a queen, but as the extraordinary woman you are." Helen's heart raced at the suggestion. The idea of leaving everything she had known for an uncertain future with a man she had met only days before should have seemed madness. And yet, as she looked into Paris's eyes and felt the strength of her feelings for him, It seemed like the only sane choice in a world that had suddenly revealed itself to be full of unexpected possibilities. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "there will be consequences. Menelaus will not simply let me go. My former suitors swore oaths to defend my marriage. There could be war." "Let there be war," Paris replied with the confidence of a young man in love. "I am a prince of Troy, heir to one of the greatest cities in the world. Our walls have never been breached. Our warriors have never been defeated. If the Greeks want to fight for you, let them come. They will find that Troy is not so easily conquered." Helen knew that she stood at a crossroads that would determine the rest of her life. She could send Paris away, remain dutiful to her marriage, and spend the rest of her days wondering what might have been. Or she could take the greatest risk of her life and trust in love to guide her to happiness. In the end, love won. As dawn broke over Sparta, Helen made her choice. She would leave with Paris, abandoning her royal duties and her marriage for the promise of a love that seemed to burn with divine fire. The practical arrangements were made quickly and quietly. Helen's most trusted servants were sworn to secrecy and helped her pack her most precious possessions. A considerable amount of treasure was gathered, both gifts that had been given to Helen over the years and royal wealth that she felt entitled to take as compensation for her own value. Some accounts suggest that Helen left willingly, driven by her love for Paris and her desire for a new life. Others claim that Paris abducted her by force, using his position as a guest to gain access to her private chambers, and then threatening her or her servants to secure compliance. Still others propose that it was a mixture of both that. Helen was initially reluctant, but was gradually persuaded by Paris's passion and Aphrodite's subtle influence. Whatever the exact truth, when the Trojan ship set sail from Sparta's harbor, the next morning, Helen was aboard. She stood at the stern, watching her homeland disappear over the horizon, her heart a mixture of excitement and terror as she contemplated the magnitude of what she had done. Paris stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his eyes bright with triumph and love. To him, it seemed that he had won the greatest prize imaginable, not just the most beautiful woman in the world, but a love that made him feel capable of conquering the very gods themselves. The voyage to Troy was not without its perils. According to some accounts, Hera, still angry over the judgment of Paris, sent storms to hinder their journey. The ship was blown off course and forced to take shelter in Egypt, where local priests and nobles were shocked by Helen's beauty and the story of her elopement. Other dangers arose as well. Pirates, always a threat in the Aegean Sea, pursued the Trojan ship when word spread that it carried fabulous treasures and the most beautiful woman in the world. Only skillful seamanship and favorable winds allowed them to escape these threats. But eventually, after weeks at sea, the walls of Troy appeared on the horizon. Helen gazed upon her new home with wonder and not a little apprehension. The city was even more magnificent than Paris had described. Its walls seemed to touch the very sky, and the palaces and temples within spoke of wealth and power that rivaled anything in Greece. The arrival of Paris with Helen caused a sensation in Troy that eclipsed even his own return from Mount Ida. Word spread through the city like wildfire that the prince had brought with him the most beautiful woman in the world, stolen from her Greek husband in a feat of daring that would be remembered for generations. The people of Troy lined the streets as Paris and Helen made their way to the palace. Some cheered the prince's romantic triumph, while others murmured with concern about the potential consequences. But all fell silent as Helen passed, struck dumb by a beauty that seemed to make the very air shimmer around her. King, Priam, and Queen Hecuba received Helen with mixed emotions. As parents, they could understand their son's passion for such an extraordinary woman. As rulers, they could not help but worry about the political ramifications of harboring another king's wife. But hospitality was sacred in the ancient world, and they welcomed Helen as a member of their family. Hector's reaction was more complex. As a military commander, he immediately understood that Paris's action was likely to provoke war with the Greeks. As a brother, he felt obligated to support Paris, regardless of his personal opinions about the wisdom of the match. As a husband who loved his own wife Andromache deeply, he could sympathize with both Paris's passion and Menelaus's likely fury. "Brother," he said to Paris privately, "have you considered what you've done? You've taken another man's wife, not just any man, but a king of Greece. Do you think Menelaus will simply accept this loss? Do you think his powerful brother Agamemnon will let this insult stand?" Paris waved away these concerns with the confidence of youth and love. "The Greeks are divided among themselves," he replied. "Their kings quarrel as often as they feast together. And even if they do come, what of it? Has any army ever breached Troy's walls? Our city has stood for generations, protected by the gods themselves. But not everyone in Troy was so sanguine about the situation." Cassandra, Paris's prophetic sister, ran through the palace screaming warnings that were, as always, dismissed as madness. "Fire! I see fire consuming Troy's walls. Take her back before it's too late. The wooden horse walks through our gates, and dead heroes rise to take revenge. Brother, you have doomed us all for the sake of a pretty face." Her prophecies, as always, fell on deaf ears. The court dismissed her warnings as the ravings of a madwoman, though some of the older nobles shifted uncomfortably and made signs against evil when she spoke. Despite these concerns, Paris and Helen were formally married according to Trojan custom. The ceremony was magnificent, befitting the union of a prince and the woman whose beauty was legendary throughout the known world. Golden diadems were exchanged, sacred oaths were spoken, and the gods were invoked to bless the marriage. Helen took to her new life in Troy with grace and intelligence. She learned the Trojan customs, studied the language until she spoke it like a native, and won the affection of the people through her kindness and generosity. She seemed to bloom in Troy's more artistic and cultured atmosphere. So different from Sparta's military austerity, the palace workshops buzzed with activity as artisans competed to create beautiful things worthy of Helen's notice. Poets composed verses celebrating her beauty, musicians wrote songs in her honor, and painters tried to capture her likeness, though all agreed that no earthly art could truly do justice to her divine beauty. For nearly a year, Paris and Helen lived as husband and wife in Troy, their love seemingly growing stronger with each passing day. Troy prospered during this time, as though Helen's presence had brought good fortune to the city. Trade flourished, the harvests were abundant, and the people were content. But all this time, across the Aegean Sea, storm clouds were gathering. When Menelaus had returned from Crete to find his palace empty and his wife gone, his rage had been terrible to behold. The king, who had always been known for his even temper, became a man possessed, consumed with fury and the burning desire for revenge. Menelaus wasted no time in sending messengers to his brother Agamemnon and to all the former suitors of Helen, reminding them of their sacred oath. He demanded their aid in recovering his wife and punishing the Trojans for their breach of hospitality and their insult to Greek honor. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From every corner of Greece, kings and heroes answered the call. Ships began to gather at Aulis, that harbor that would forever be associated with the launching of the greatest military expedition in ancient history. Agamemnon, as the most powerful king in Greece, assumed command of the expedition. For him, Helen's abduction was not merely a personal insult to his brother. It was an opportunity to assert Greek dominance over the Aegean world and to extend his influence across the sea to the wealthy cities of Asia Minor. The army that gathered at Aulis was unprecedented in its size and composition. Nearly every significant warrior in Greece was present, drawn by oaths of honor, the promise of glory, or the prospect of rich plunder. The greatest heroes of the age had come together for this single purpose: to cross the sea and make Troy pay for its prince's audacious theft. Among them was Achilles, the young warrior whose prowess in battle was already legendary despite his youth. His presence alone was enough to inspire confidence in the expedition's chances of success, for it was widely believed that no city could stand against him for long. There was Ajax, the Greater, son of Telamon, whose strength was said to be second only to Achilles. His massive shield and powerful spear had never failed him in battle, and his courage was absolute. Odysseus of Ithaca brought not just his ships and men, but his legendary cunning and intelligence. It was his diplomatic skill that had helped organize the expedition, and his strategic mind would prove invaluable in the trials to come. Diomedes of Argos, though young, had already proven himself as both a warrior and a leader. His fearlessness in battle was matched by his wisdom in council, making him one of Agamemnon's most trusted allies. Nestor of Pylos, the oldest of the kings, brought the wisdom of his years and his experience of many wars. Though past his physical prime, his counsel was invaluable, and his very presence lent gravity and legitimacy to the expedition. From Ajax of Locris came swift ships and fierce warriors. From Menestheus of Athens came disciplined troops and skilled craftsmen. From every kingdom and city-state of Greece, men gathered to join what would become the most famous military expedition in ancient history. Yet even with all these heroes assembled, the expedition faced challenges before it could even set sail. The winds, which had blown favorably when Paris sailed to Greece, now refused to fill the sails of the Greek fleet. Day after day, the ships sat motionless in the harbor while the frustrated warriors waited for the weather to change. Some whispered that the gods themselves opposed the expedition. Others suggested that Troy's wealth had purchased divine protection. But Calchas the prophet, when consulted about the delay, delivered a message that chilled Agamemnon's heart. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, holds back the winds, the seer announced. She demands satisfaction for an offense against her sacred deer. The goddess will accept nothing less than the life of Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. The demand was monstrous. Agamemnon was being asked to sacrifice his own child to secure favorable winds for his expedition. The king raged against the prophecy, threatened to abandon the entire enterprise, and cursed the gods for their cruelty. But as the days passed and the winds remained contrary, pressure mounted from the other kings. They had left their own kingdoms to follow Agamemnon's call, and they could not remain indefinitely in the harbor at Aulis. Some began to speak of returning home if the situation did not improve soon. Faced with the collapse of his great enterprise and the loss of his chance to extend Greek power across the Aegean, Agamemnon made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He sent word to his wife Clytemnestra, asking her to bring Iphigenia to Aulis, under the pretense that the girl was to be married to Achilles. The deception was cruel and elaborate. Clytemnestra, delighted at the prospect of such a prestigious match for her daughter, prepared Iphigenia for what she believed would be her wedding day. The girl, excited and nervous about marrying the greatest hero of Greece, traveled to Aulis in a festive mood, completely unaware of her true fate. When mother and daughter arrived at the military camp, they were shocked by what they found. Instead of wedding preparations, they discovered an army gathered for war. Instead of celebration, they found an atmosphere of grim determination and barely suppressed violence. The truth emerged gradually and horribly. Some accounts say that Iphigenia learned of her fate and, displaying courage worthy of her royal blood, chose to sacrifice herself willingly for the good of Greece. Others tell of a struggle, of a young girl dragged screaming to the altar while her mother wailed in anguish and her father turned away in shame. Few sources suggest that at the last moment, Artemis herself intervened, replacing Iphigenia with a deer and spiriting the girl away to serve as a priestess in one of her temples. But whether Iphigenia died on the altar or was rescued by divine intervention, the psychological damage to Agamemnon and his family was complete. Clytemnestra's love for her husband died that day, replaced by a hatred that would eventually consume them both. As she watched the ceremony that took her daughter's life, or seemed to, she swore an oath of her own that Agamemnon would pay for this crime, if not in this war, then when he returned home. But the sacrifice had the desired effect. As soon as the ceremony was completed, the winds began to blow. The sails of 1,000 ships filled with air, and the greatest armada the ancient world had ever seen prepared to set sail for Troy. The departure from Aulis was a spectacle that those who witnessed it would remember for the rest of their lives. Ship after ship cleared the harbor, their bronze-tipped rams cutting through the waves, their painted sails billowing in the wind. The sound of oars keeping time echoed across the water, while war songs and hymns to the gods rose from the decks. As the fleet sailed eastward across the Aegean, the die was cast. What had begun as a divine dispute over beauty continued as a mortal romance, and escalated into a diplomatic crisis, was now about to become the greatest war of the ancient world. In Troy, the first reports of the approaching armada caused consternation and debate. Some counseled sending Helen back to her husband to avoid the coming conflict. Others, including Paris himself, argued that Troy's walls were impregnable, and that no Greek army, however large, could succeed where so many others had failed. King Priam, caught between his love for his son and his responsibility to his people, chose to stand firm. Troy would not yield to Greek threats, he declared. If Agamemnon wanted war, he would find that the Trojans were ready to give him one dot as the Greek ships appeared on the horizon like a dark cloud covering the sea. The greatest war in ancient literature was about to begin. It would last for 10 years, claim the lives of countless heroes on both sides, and end with the complete destruction of one of the world's greatest cities. But all of that lay in the future. For now, as our sleepy listeners drift toward dreams, we can imagine Helen on the walls of Troy, watching the approaching fleet and perhaps wondering if the love that had brought her to this place was worth the price that was about to be paid. For the judgment of Paris had set in motion forces that would reshape the ancient world. Divine jealousy, mortal passion, and the clash of civilizations were about to converge in a conflict that would echo through history and legend for thousands of years to come. Sleep well, dear listeners, and dream of ancient ships sailing across wine dark seas toward destinies written by the gods themselves. In our next episode, we'll follow those ships as they land on Trojan shores and begin the siege that would test the courage and endurance of both sides in this greatest of ancient wars. The vast Greek fleet carved its path across the Aegean. A moving city of timber and canvas stretched across the blue waters. White foam churned beneath 1,000 hulls as oarsmen pulled in rhythm to the steady beat of drummers. On the lead ship, Agamemnon stood at the prow, his crimson cloak snapping. In the wind, his eyes fixed on the eastern horizon where Troy awaited. The journey was not direct. The Greeks, many of whom had never sailed beyond sight of their homeland shores, followed a winding route from island to island. Each night, they beached their vessels on sheltered shores, made camp, hunted for fresh meat, and refilled their water skins. The kings gathered around fires to discuss strategy, while the common soldiers told tales of home or speculated about the glories and riches that awaited them in Asia. That all the islands welcomed them as liberators or allies. Some, fearing Trojan reprisals should the expedition fail, refused to provide supplies. Others, with ties of trade or kinship to Troy, actively resisted. The first blood of the war was shed not beneath Troy's walls, but on these scattered islands. As the Greeks took by force what was not freely given, Achilles distinguished himself in these early conflicts. On the island of Tenedos, when local forces ambushed the Greeks as they came ashore seeking water, the young warrior led a counterattack that routed the defenders and captured their main settlement. It was here that he won as his prize the maiden Briseis, a fateful acquisition that would later trigger his withdrawal from the war. The fleet paused at the sacred island of Lemnos, where Philoctetes, bearer of the mighty bow of Heracles, suffered a terrible misfortune. A venomous serpent, guardian of a shrine, bit his foot. The wound festered, producing a stench so foul that the other Greeks could not bear his presence. Following Odysseus's counsel, Agamemnon ordered Philoctetes abandoned on Lemnos, leaving the suffering archer to fend for himself on the desolate island. This cruel decision, expedient though it seemed, would later force the Greeks to humbly seek the man they had discarded. As the fleet neared Trojan waters, Menelaus grew increasingly restless. 10 years had passed since he had last seen Helen, 10 years in which his love had curdled into something darker, a need for vengeance that consumed his thoughts. "Will she remember me?" he asked his brother one night as they shared wine beneath the stars. "Will she still be beautiful, or has time dimmed what the poets called her god-touched radiance?" Agamemnon had no answers for these questions. His own thoughts dwelled not on Helen, but on Troy's rumored wealth and the glory that would come from conquering a city thought unconquerable. And perhaps, in quiet moments, his mind returned to Aulis and the daughter he had sacrificed to reach this point. Memory he pushed away each time it surfaced. Before the fleet could reach Troy itself, an important question needed resolution: where precisely to land? Troy's immediate coastline offered few suitable beaches for landing such a massive force. Moreover, the Trojans would certainly be watching these approaches most carefully. Nestor, the oldest and wisest of the kings, advised, "Caution. We should not announce ourselves with the full strength of our fleet. Let us send a smaller force first to secure a landing place and assess the Trojan defenses." Odysseus agreed with this plan, but added his own counsel: "Before we commit to battle, we should at least attempt to resolve this matter through diplomacy. Perhaps, seeing our strength, Priam will return Helen and make reparations without the need for bloodshed." And so it was decided. A small advance fleet would proceed to the Trojan coast, while the main force would temporarily hold position among the scattered islands offshore, hidden from Trojan scouts. Odysseus, known for his persuasive speech, would lead an embassy to Troy once a beachhead was established. The advance ships, led by Protesilaus of Phalas, approached the Trojan shore at dawn. From hiding places among the coastal rocks, Trojan archers watched the Greek vessels draw near. As the first ship grounded on the beach and lowered its gangplank, a hail of arrows greeted the invaders. Protesilaus, eager for the glory of being first ashore on Trojan soil, leaped from his ship with shield raised. An arrow found the gap between his shield and breastplate, piercing his lung. He staggered forward 3 steps onto Trojan land before falling. In that moment, he fulfilled an old prophecy that the first Greek to touch Trojan soil would be the first to die. Despite this inauspicious beginning, the advance force pushed forward, driving back the Trojan defenders and securing a large enough section of beach for the main fleet to land. Word was sent to Agamemnon, and soon the full Greek armada approached the shore, an awesome sight that caused even the bravest Trojan scouts to retreat toward the safety of their city's walls. As thousands of Greek soldiers established their camp on the Trojan plain, Odysseus prepared for his diplomatic mission. With Menelaus at his side and a small honor guard, he approached Troy's mighty gates, carrying olive branches as symbols of peaceful intent. The Trojans, impressed by this gesture and curious about the kings who had sailed so far to their shores, opened their gates and escorted the Greek embassy to Priam's palace. In the great hall of Troy, before the assembled court, Odysseus spoke with all the eloquence for which he was famous. "King Priam, noble princes of Troy, we come before you not seeking war, though as you have seen, we are prepared for it. We come seeking justice for a grave wrong. Your son Paris has taken what is not his, the wife of King Menelaus, and the treasure of Sparta. Return Helen and these stolen goods, make fair reparation for this breach of sacred hospitality, and we will depart in peace, leaving Troy unharmed." Menelaus then stepped forward, his eyes scanning the hall for Helen, but finding only curious Trojan faces. I speak not as a king now, but as a husband. Return my wife to me. Whatever passed between her and Paris, I am willing to forgive if she returns willingly. Troy need not suffer for the actions of one man. Priam, dignified in his advanced age, rose from his throne. You speak of justice and peace, yet you bring an army to our shores. Your ships blacken our coast from end to end. Are these the actions of men seeking peaceful resolution? Before Odysseus could reply, Paris entered the hall with Helen at his side. Her face was veiled, but all eyes turned to her nonetheless. Paris spoke with the confidence of youth, seemingly untroubled by the gravity of the situation. Helen is my wife now, by her own choice, and by the blessing of Aphrodite herself. What kind of husband would I be if I surrendered her to another man? What kind of Trojan would surrender what he loves because of Greek threats? Menelaus started forward, hand moving instinctively to his sword, but Odysseus restrained him. This was neither the time nor place for violence. The Greek embassy departed without achieving its goal, but not before Antenor, one of Priam's oldest advisers, pulled Odysseus aside. Not all in Troy support this folly. Some of us urged returning. The woman before your ships even appeared on our horizon. But Paris has the king's ear, and Priam's love for his son blinds him to the danger. With the failure of diplomacy, both sides prepared for war. The Greeks expanded their beachhead, building a fortified camp that stretched along the shore, with their ships drawn up on the beach behind palisade walls. The Trojans gathered their forces within their city and sent messengers to their allies throughout Asia Minor, calling for aid against the Greek invaders. From the walls of Troy, Helen watched, the Greek camp taking shape on the distant shore. Did she search the milling figures for a glimpse of her former husband? Did she regret the choices or lack of choices that had brought two nations to the brink of war? The ancient Thales are silent on her thoughts, leaving only the image of a woman watching from the walls as armies gathered to fight in her name. The stage was now set for a conflict that would last far longer than either side anticipated. The Greeks had reached Troy, their mighty force assembled on foreign soil. The Trojans stood firm behind their legendary walls, confident in their defenses and their divine protectors. Soon the plain between city and sea would echo with the clash of bronze, the war cries of heroes, and the names of men seeking glory in the face of death. Dawn broke over the plain of Troy, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The bronze tips of Greek spears caught the early light as the army formed its battle lines. Across the field, the gates of Troy swung open, and Trojan forces marched out to meet their foes. The first major battle of the war was about to begin. For 9 long years, this scene would repeat itself with variations, an endless cycle of advances and retreats, small victories and defeats, moments of heroism and tragedy that blended together. In the grinding machinery of war, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Greeks, for all their numbers, could not breach Troy's mighty walls. The Trojans, despite occasional successes in the field, could not drive the invaders back. Into the sea. In those early years, the war spread beyond the plain of Troy itself. Realizing that a direct assault on the city might prove impossible, Achilles led raids against Troy's allies and supply lines. With his Myrmidons, elite warriors who followed him with unwavering loyalty, he attacked 12 cities by sea and 11 by land, according to Homer's count. Each fell before his fury, adding to his legend and filling the Greek camp with plunder and slaves. Among the cities sacked was Lyrnessus, where Achilles captured Briseis, a noble woman whom he took as his prize. Though she came to him as a captive, something grew between them that transcended their circumstances, not love, perhaps, but a mutual respect that made her more than simply a spoil of war in his eyes. Meanwhile, Odysseus and Diomedes led scouting, missions and ambushes, using cunning where strength alone might fail. During one such mission, they captured Dolon, a Trojan spy who revealed valuable information about Troy's defenses and allies before meeting his end at Greek hands. The Trojans were not passive in these exchanges. Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, and Paris's elder brother, led bold sorties against the Greek camp. With his distinctive helmet with its horsehair plume, he was a rallying point for Trojan forces and a figure of dread for Greek soldiers. Unlike Paris, whose interests lay more in the pleasures of the palace than the hardships of battle, Hector embodied the ideal of Trojan nobility, a devoted husband to Andromache, a loving father to his son Astyanax, and a tireless defender of his city. The gods themselves took sides in this mortal conflict. Apollo, the archer god, favored Troy, as did Aphrodite, who had started the war through her promise to Paris, and Ares, who delighted in the bloodshed. The Greeks found supporters in Hera and Athena, still bitter over Paris's judgment, and in Poseidon, who held an ancient grudge against Troy for a slight by a previous king. Zeus, father of gods and men, attempted to remain neutral, though his sympathies often seemed to lean toward the Trojans. Divine intervention manifested in various ways. Sometimes, a god would deflect an arrow meant for a favored hero, or strengthen a warrior's arm at a crucial moment. At other times, the immortals took a more active role, appearing on the battlefield, in disguise to turn the tide of battle. When Aphrodite saw Paris losing a duel to Menelaus, she wrapped her protégé in mist and spirited him away to safety, an inglorious rescue that did little for the prince's reputation among his own people. Life in the Greek camp settled into routines over the years. The kings still met in Agamemnon's tent to discuss strategy, though increasingly these councils dissolved into arguments as frustration grew. The common soldiers built more permanent structures for themselves, accepting that this would be no quick campaign. They fished, hunted in the nearby hills, and held competitions to maintain their fighting edge during lulls in the conflict. Inside Troy, conditions gradually deteriorated as the siege continued. While the city's massive grain stores prevented starvation, fresh meat and produce became increasingly luxurious. The constant state of alert wore on civilians and soldiers alike. Children who had been infants when the war began were now old enough to train with wooden swords, preparing to take their places on the walls if the conflict continued much longer. Helen's position in Troy grew more complex as the years passed. Some Trojans blamed her for their suffering, whispering curses as she passed. Others, including the elderly King Priam, treated her with kindness, seeing her as a victim of fate and divine manipulation rather than the cause of their troubles. She spent hours on the walls, watching the distant battles, sometimes called upon to identify Greek heroes for the Trojan observers, who had never seen these men in peacetime. In the 8th year of the war, a potential turning point arrived with the appearance of Rhesus, king of Thrace, who came to Troy's aid with fresh troops and magnificent white horses. A prophecy stated that if these horses drank from the river Scamander and grazed on Trojan grass, the city would never fall. Learning of this through spies, Odysseus and Diomedes undertook a night mission into the Trojan camp. Under cover of darkness, they slaughtered the sleeping Rhesus and many of his men, then stole the prophetic horses before they could fulfill the conditions that would have made Troy impregnable. This pattern of raid and counter-raid, of battle followed by uneasy truce, might have continued indefinitely had not a fateful quarrel erupted in the Greek camp, a dispute between kings that would change the course of the war and lead to the deaths of its greatest heroes. During a successful raid on a town allied with Troy, the Greeks captured 2 noble women, Chrysis, daughter of Chryses, a priest of Apollo, and Brises, who was given to Achilles after the sack of Lyrnessus. Agamemnon claimed Chryses as his prize, but soon after, a plague struck the Greek camp. Calchas the seer revealed the cause. Apollo was punishing them for Agamemnon's enslavement of the priest's daughter. Reluctantly, Agamemnon agreed to return Chrysis to her father, ending the plague, but the high king's pride demanded compensation. "If I must lose my prize," he declared before the assembled Greek leaders, "then I shall take one of yours in her place." His eyes fell on Achilles, whose fame and independence had long rankled him. "I will take Briseis, your captive, to replace the woman I have lost." Achilles' hand flew to his sword. "You coward," he spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You lead from the rear while better men bleed for your cause, and now you would steal what I have earned with my own hands." Only the intervention of Athena, visible to Achilles alone, prevented him from striking down the High King then and there. Instead, the greatest warrior of the Greeks made a fateful decision. "Take her," he said at last, his voice cold as winter. "But know this, my men and I will fight no more in your war. Let us see how you fare against Hector without Achilles at your side." True to his word, Achilles withdrew to his tent and his ships, taking his myrmidons with him. For days he sat, brooding by the shore, watching as the tide of battle turned against the Greeks. Without his strength to tip the scales, the Trojans, sensing the Greeks' disarray, pressed their advantage. Hector led increasingly bold attacks, driving the invaders back to their ships. Without Achilles, the Greeks found themselves fighting for survival rather than victory. The war had entered a new and deadlier phase, one that would bring both sides to the edge of destruction. As flames began to lick at the first Greek ships, pushed burning toward the fleet by Trojan forces, the consequences of the quarrel between kings became clear. Pride and honor, the twin currencies of heroic society, had set heroes against each other just as surely as they had launched the war itself. As the Greeks faltered without their greatest champion, desperate measures would be needed to reverse their failing fortunes. The stage was set for the central tragedy of the Trojan War, a chain of events that would begin with a friend's well-intentioned intervention and end with the deaths of the mightiest warriors on both sides. The wrath of Achilles, kindled by Agamemnon's insult, would soon consume the battlefield in fire, more devastating than any the Trojans could bring to the Greek ships. Smoke darkened the sky above the Greek camp as more ships caught fire. Trojan warriors swarmed forward, emboldened by Hector's leadership and the conspicuous absence of Achilles from the battlefield. The Greeks fought with desperate courage, but they were being pushed inexorably back toward the sea that had carried them to these hostile shores. In his black-hulled ship at the edge of the camp, Achilles watched the battle unfold with stony indifference. His armor hung untouched on its stand. His legendary spear, which few other men could even lift, leaned unused against the wall. The great hero's wrath burned cold within him, a rage directed not at the Trojans, but at Agamemnon, who had publicly dishonored him by taking Briseis. "The Greeks are being slaughtered," said Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion since childhood. "Our friends are dying while you sit brooding over an insult." Achilles' eyes remained fixed on the distant battle. "An insult? Is that what you call it when a man takes what is yours by right of conquest? When he undermines you before all the army? No, my friend, this is not about a woman. This is about honor, without which a man is nothing." As the situation grew dire, Agamemnon finally acknowledged his error. He sent an embassy to Achilles' tent, Odysseus, Ajax, and the old mentor Phoenix, bearing gifts and promises of reconciliation. Agamemnon offered to return Briseis untouched, along with 7 tripods, 10 talents of gold, 20 bronze cauldrons, 12 horses, 7 women skilled in crafts, and 20 Trojan captives of Achilles' choosing should Troy fall. He even offered one of his own daughters in marriage and 7 prosperous towns as a dowry. Odysseus presented these offers with all his famous eloquence, appealing to Achilles' sense of compassion for his suffering comrades. Ajax, more blunt, reminded him of the bonds of friendship that united the Greek leaders. Old Phoenix, who had helped raise Achilles, told him a parable about the dangers of unyielding anger, but Achilles remained unmoved. "I will not fight for Agamemnon," he declared. "The man has no honor, and I want nothing from him, not his gold, not his women, not his friendship. Let him reap what he has sown." The embassy returned empty-handed, leaving the Greek leaders to prepare for what seemed inevitable defeat. Yet Achilles was not entirely without compassion. As Hector's forces pressed closer to the heart of the Greek camp, he allowed his beloved friend Patroclus to borrow his distinctive armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle. "Wear my armor," Achilles told him. "The Trojans will think I have returned to the fight and may lose heart. But listen carefully. Push them back from our ships, but go no further. Do not pursue them to the walls of Troy. The gods favor Hector within sight of his city." Patroclus agreed, though his heart was already racing with the prospect of glory. He donned the magnificent armor of Achilles, the gleaming breastplate, the greaves with their silver ankle clasps, the ornate shield, and most distinctive of all, the helmet with its horsehair crest that could be seen across the battlefield. The effect of his appearance was exactly as Achilles had predicted. Seeing what they thought was the dreaded Achilles returning to battle, many Trojan warriors broke ranks and fled. Patroclus led the Myrmidons in a ferocious counterattack, pushing the Trojans back from the burning ships. But in the heat of combat, flushed with success, and the unfamiliar sensation of being feared as Achilles was feared, Patroclus forgot his promise. Instead of withdrawing, once the immediate danger to the ships had passed, he pressed forward, pursuing the retreating Trojans across the plain toward their city. 3 times Patroclus charged the walls of Troy, and 3 times Apollo himself pushed him back. "Return, Patroclus," the god warned. "This is not your destiny." But caught up in battle frenzy, Patroclus ignored the divine warning. As he fought near the walls, the god struck him from behind, stunning him and knocking his helmet from his head. In that vulnerable moment, a Trojan warrior named Euphorbus speared him in the back. Wounded and disoriented, Patroclus stumbled backward, directly into the path of Hector. Troy's greatest champion did not hesitate. His spear drove deep into Patroclus' unprotected belly. As the Greek warrior collapsed, Hector stood over him with grim triumph. "Did you think you were Achilles?" he asked. "Did you think you could sack our city wearing his armor? Now you fall, and he will not come to save you." With his dying breath, Patroclus managed a prophecy of his own. "Enjoy your victory while you can, Hector. Death already stands behind you, waiting. Achilles will not rest until you lie as I do now." A brutal fight erupted over Patroclus' body and the armor of Achilles that he wore. The Myrmidons fought desperately to recover their fallen comrade, while the Trojans, led by Hector, sought to claim the legendary armor as a trophy. In the end, Menelaus and Ajax managed to carry Patroclus' broken body back to the Greek camp, but Hector retreated to Troy with Achilles' armor as his prize. When word reached Achilles that Patroclus had fallen, his grief knew no bounds. He threw himself to the ground, pouring dust over his head and tearing at his hair. His anguished cries carried across the camp, chilling the blood of all who heard them. His mother, the sea nymph Thetis, rose from the waves in response to her son's pain. She found him beyond consolation, consumed now by a new kind of wrath, not the cold anger he had nursed against Agamemnon, but a white-hot fury directed at Hector and all of Troy. "I will return to battle," Achilles vowed. "I will not eat or drink until Patroclus is avenged and Hector lies dead by my hand." "My son," Thetis said, her voice breaking with foreknowledge of what was to come, "if you kill Hector, your own death will follow swiftly. This is the fate the fates have spun for you." "Then let it come," Achilles replied without hesitation. "What worth has life when I have failed to protect the one I loved most? I will not live with this shame." Since Hector now possessed Achilles' armor, Thetis journeyed to Olympus itself, to the forge of Hephaestus, the divine craftsman. She begged him to create new armor for her son, and moved by her plea, the lame god worked through the night at his magical forge. By dawn, he had created the most magnificent armor ever worn by a mortal, a shield depicting the entire cosmos, a breastplate that shone like the sun, greaves of indestructible bronze, and a helmet crowned with a plume of pure gold. When Thetis delivered this divine panoply to her son, Achilles wasted no time. He called for an assembly of the entire Greek army. Before the gathered host, he formally renounced his quarrel with Agamemnon. "The anger that divided us has cost too much," he declared. "While we squabbled like children, good men died. I return to battle now not for you, Agamemnon, but for Patroclus, who deserved better than to die wearing my armor while I sulked in my tent." Agamemnon, equally eager to put their feud behind them in the face of a common enemy, accepted Achilles' return without demanding apology. He immediately ordered Briseis returned, along with all the gifts he had promised, but Achilles waved this aside. "Keep your treasures. They mean nothing to me now. All that matters is getting to Hector before the sun sets." As Achilles prepared for battle, strapping on his new divine armor, his immortal horses, Xanthus and Balius, offspring of the west wind, spoke to him with human voice. "A rare and ominous sign. We will carry you swiftly today, mighty Achilles," said Xanthus. "But the hour of your death approaches. It is not through any failure of ours that Patroclus fell, but by the will of the gods and the strength of men. I know I am doomed to die here, far from my homeland," Achilles replied grimly. "But I will not depart for the house of Hades before sending many Trojans ahead to announce my coming." When Achilles finally charged onto the battlefield in his gleaming new armor, the effect was terror-inducing. Trojans who had been confidently pursuing the Greeks now turned and ran in panic. Many were cut down as they fled, others in the air. Desperation to escape plunged into the river Scamander, where Achilles followed, slaughtering them in such numbers that the river god himself rose up in protest, nearly drowning the hero in his swirling waters. Only the intervention of Hephaestus, who sent fire to dry up the river's fury, saved Achilles from this divine wrath. Freed from the river's clutches, he continued his rampage across the plain, driving the surviving Trojans back to their city like frightened cattle. At the gates of Troy, only one man remained outside as the massive doors swung shut behind the retreating army. Hector, Troy's champion, waited alone to face the approaching storm. His father, King Priam, and his mother, Hecuba, pleaded with him from the walls to come inside to fight another day. But Hector stood his ground. "I cannot hide behind walls while others die for me," he said. "I led our forces in their confidence. I cannot abandon them in their fear." As Achilles drew nearer, however, even Hector's courage faltered. The man approaching him seemed more than human, his divine armor blazing in the sun, his face a mask of unstoppable fury. At the last moment, Hector's nerve broke, and he ran not in the shame of cowardice, but in the instinctive recognition that he faced something beyond mortal opposition. 3 times they circled the walls of Troy, Achilles in pursuit, Hector in flight. The gods watched from above. Apollo, who had protected Hector many times before, and Athena, who ensured Achilles would not fail in his pursuit. Was Athena who finally ended the chase by appearing to Hector in the guise of his brother, suggesting they make a stand together. When Hector turned to find his brother was not there, Achilles was upon him. The duel between the 2 greatest warriors of their age was brief, terrible. Hector fought with the desperate courage of a man defending everything he loved, but Achilles fought with the transcendent fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. The outcome was never truly in doubt. Achilles' spear found the gap at Hector's throat, one of the few vulnerable spots in the armor that had once belonged to Achilles himself. As Hector lay dying, he made a final request. "I beg you, by your own life and by your parents', do not leave my body to be devoured by dogs and birds. Accept the ransom my father will offer, and let him give me proper burial rites." But Achilles, still consumed by grief and rage, was beyond such human considerations. "Beg me not by my parents," he snarled. "I wish my fury would drive me to cut your flesh and eat it raw for what you've done. No ransom will convince me to return your body. The dogs and birds will have you, as you would have done with Patroclus had you taken him. With his last breath, Hector prophesied, "Remember on the day Paris and Apollo bring you down before the Scaean gates. Remember my words." After Hector's death, Achilles' treatment of his enemy's body shocked even his fellow Greeks. He pierced the fallen hero's heels, threaded them with leather thongs, and dragged a corpse behind his chariot, circling the city walls in a grim parody of their earlier chase. For 11 days he continued this desecration, driving around the tomb of Patroclus each morning with Hector's body in tow. The gods themselves were outraged by this violation of sacred custom. Zeus sent Thetis to her son with a message. "You have angered the immortals with your excessive vengeance. The time has come to accept ransom and return Hector's body to his people." On the 12th night, guided by Hermes, King Priam of Troy made his way secretly into the Greek camp and to Achilles' tent. The old king knelt before the man who had killed so many of his sons, most notably his beloved Hector, and kissed the young hands that had brought him such grief. "Remember your own father, Achilles," Priam said, his voice steady despite his sorrow. "He is old, as I am old, and he waits for a son who may never return. At least he can hope, while I kneel before the killer of my children. Have pity, if not for me, then for the memory of your own father." These words penetrated Achilles' armor of grief and rage. For the first time since Patroclus' death, he wept not just for his friend, but for all that had been lost, for his own approaching death, for the futility of the endless cycle of violence and vengeance. Together, the old king and the young warrior grieved for their respective losses, finding a moment of shared humanity amid the waste of war. When dawn came, Achilles had Hector's body washed, anointed with oils, and wrapped in fine cloth. He granted the Trojans 12 days of peace to conduct funeral rites for their champion, a brief respite in a war that had already consumed nearly a decade, and the lives of countless heroes dot as Hector's funeral pyre burned within the walls of Troy. Achilles stood on the shore, looking out at the dark sea. His wrath had been quenched in blood and tears, but the price had been immeasurable, and the prophecy remained unfulfilled. His own death approached as certain as the dawn that would follow this temporary peace, the 12 days of peace granted. For Hector's funeral rites passed like a brief dream in the long nightmare of war. When the truce ended, the conflict resumed with renewed intensity. Though Troy had lost its greatest defender, the city still stood defiant behind its god-built walls. The Greeks, despite the return of Achilles to their ranks, had suffered too many losses to attempt a direct assault on those legendary fortifications. Achilles, knowing his own death was approaching, fought with a strange combination of fury and fatalism. Each morning he would arm himself in his divine armor. Each day he would cut down scores of Trojan warriors. And each night he would return to his tent, having survived another day despite the prophecy hanging over him. The tide of battle had turned decisively in the Greeks' favor, yet final victory remained elusive. In this deadlock, fresh heroes arrived to bolster Troy's defense. From the east came Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, leading a contingent of women warriors as skilled and brave as any men. The Amazon queen sought glory and redemption, having accidentally killed her sister during a hunt. For a time, Penthesilea and her Amazons brought new hope to Troy. They led several successful sorties against the Greek lines, with the queen herself displaying extraordinary prowess in battle. Achilles, who had been withdrawing from combat after each day's necessary bloodshed, found himself drawn back to the front lines by tales of this warrior woman's skill. Their eventual confrontation was as brief as it was legendary. Penthesilea fought with remarkable courage, even managing to pierce Achilles' divine armor with her spear, one of the few to ever wound the seemingly invulnerable hero. But in the end, Achilles' godlike strength prevailed as his spear found her heart. Eyes met, and according to some accounts, Achilles fell in love with the Amazon queen in the very moment he killed her. As he removed her helmet, revealing her face in death, some Greeks mockingly suggested that Achilles should take her body to his tent, implying a desecration worse than what he had done to Hector. Enraged by this disrespect toward a worthy opponent, Achilles killed the man who had spoken Thersites, a common soldier known for his insolence. This act divided the Greek camp, with some feeling Achilles had overstepped by killing a fellow Greek over a fallen enemy. After the Amazons came another unexpected ally for Troy, Memnon, king of Ethiopia, son of the dawn goddess Eos. His arrival, with a substantial force, once again shifted the momentum of battle. Memnon's prowess was second only to Achilles, and he cut down many Greek heroes, including Nestor's son Antilochus, who sacrificed himself to save his elderly father from Memnon's spear. Grief-stricken over the death of Antilochus, who had been dear to him since the loss of Patroclus, Achilles sought out Memnon for a duel that the gods themselves watched with special interest. On Olympus, Zeus weighed the fates of the two heroes on golden scales, and Memnon's scale sank, foretelling his doom. The duel between Achilles and Memnon was long and evenly matched. Both were sons of immortal mothers. Both wore divine armor. Both fought with superhuman skill. Spears were cast and dodged. Swords clashed and shields buckled, until at last Achilles drove his blade beneath Memnon's breastplate as the Ethiopian king fell. His mother Eos wept tears that became the morning dew, and she continues to mourn him each dawn to this day. With each victory, Achilles drew closer to his prophesied doom. Even as the Trojans retreated toward their gates following Memnon's defeat, Paris, who had started the war but rarely distinguished himself in battle, stood with Apollo at the Scaean gate as Achilles pursued the fleeing Trojans. Paris knocked an arrow to his bow. Apollo guided the shot to the one vulnerable spot on Achilles' body, his heel, which had not been dipped in the river Styx when his mother had sought to make him immortal as an infant. The arrow struck true, piercing the tendon that would forever after bear Achilles' name. The great hero stumbled, then fell, unable to believe that his end had come not at the hands of a worthy opponent in fair combat, but from a distance shot, by the man whose actions had launched the war. As Achilles lay dying, Paris and the Trojans moved to take his body, but Ajax and Odysseus fought their way to their fallen comrade, driving back the enemy and recovering the corpse of their greatest warrior. The death of Achilles plunged the Greek camp into mourning, more profound even than when Patroclus had fallen. For 17 days, the funeral games held in his honor paused the fighting as heroes competed to honor his memory. His divine armor became the subject of a bitter dispute between Ajax and Odysseus, both of whom had risked their lives to recover his body. When the Greek leaders awarded the armor to Odysseus in recognition of his cunning and strategic mind, Ajax, the physically strongest Greek after Achilles, was driven mad by the slight to his honor. In his madness, he slaughtered a flock of sheep, believing them to be his fellow Greeks who had wronged him. When he came to his senses and realized what he had done, his shame drove him to fall upon his own sword. Thus, within a short span, the Greeks had lost their 3 greatest warriors, Patroclus, Achilles, and Ajax. Victory seemed more distant than ever, especially when Apollo's priest Calchas revealed that Troy would never fall while it possessed the Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena that protected the city. Odysseus and Diomedes undertook a dangerous night mission, infiltrating Troy through underground passages, stealing the Palladium, and escaping back to the Greek camp. Still the walls stood unbreached. 10 years of siege, countless heroes dead on both sides, and the end seemed no closer than when the 1,000 ships had first landed on Trojan shores. It was then that Odysseus, whose strategic mind had been sharpened by a decade of inconclusive warfare, conceived a plan so audacious that it would either bring about Troy's downfall or result in the final destruction of the Greek forces. "We cannot defeat Troy through strength of arms," he told the assembled Greek leaders in Agamemnon's tent. "Their walls are impregnable, built by the gods themselves." But what if we could convince the Trojans to bring us inside those walls of their own accord? The plan that Odysseus outlined that night, the stratagem of the wooden horse, would become the most famous military deception in history. A testament to the adage that when strength fails, cunning may yet prevail. Meanwhile, within Troy's walls, the mood was cautiously optimistic. The death of Achilles had raised hopes that the siege might soon be lifted. Paris, elevated in status by his fortunate shot, strutted through the palace as if the war were already won. But his triumph was short-lived. In a skirmish outside the walls, Paris himself was wounded by a poisoned arrow shot by Philoctetes, who had finally been brought from Lemnos to the Greek camp after a prophecy revealed that Troy could not fall without Heracles' bow, which Philoctetes possessed. The wound festered, and Paris, in desperation, sought out his first wife, the mountain nymph Oenone, whom he had abandoned for Helen years before. Only she had the power to heal such wounds, but bitter over his betrayal, she refused to help. By the time she relented and rushed to Troy, Paris was already dead. In her grief, Oenone threw herself upon his funeral pyre. Helen, who had been Paris's prize and the cause of so much suffering, was passed to his brother Deiphobus, though some in Troy suggested returning her to the Greeks to end the conflict. But after 10 years of war and incalculable losses on both sides, neither the Greeks nor the Trojans were willing to end matters so simply. Too much blood had been spilled, too many heroes had fallen, too many oaths of vengeance had been sworn. The stage was set for the final act of the tragedy, a desperate gamble by the Greeks, a fatal mistake by the Trojans, and the fiery end of a city that had stood for centuries. The wooden horse stood on the plains before Troy, massive and imposing in the golden light of sunset. Its polished flanks gleamed, and its carved head seemed to gaze toward the city with hollow eyes. The Trojan scouts who first spotted it approached cautiously, puzzled by this strange object left behind on the otherwise abandoned beach. The Greek camps that had dotted the shoreline for a decade were gone, tents struck, cooking fires extinguished, waste pits filled in. More shocking still, the vast fleet that had brought the invaders to Trojan shores had vanished. Only blackened patches on the sand remained where 1,000 ships had been dragged up for so many years. Word spread quickly through Troy. Citizens rushed to the walls, hardly daring to believe that their long nightmare might be over. The Greeks had finally abandoned their futile siege. After 10 grinding years, the war might truly be at an end. But what was this massive wooden structure they had left behind? A scouting party ventured out from the city gates, the first time in years that Trojans had been able to walk the plain without fear of Greek arrows or spears. They found the beach deserted except for a single Greek soldier bound to a post. The man was bruised and bloodied, apparently left behind in the Greeks' hasty departure. This man was Sinon, chosen by Odysseus for his quick wit and convincing manner. When the Trojans cut him free, he fell to his knees in apparent gratitude. "Thank the gods you found me," he gasped. "They would have sacrificed me for favorable winds had I not escaped my bonds." The Trojans, suspicious but curious, questioned him about the wooden horse. Sinon's tale was a masterpiece of deception, crafted to play on Trojan pride and religious fears. "The horse is an offering to Athena," he explained, "built at Chalcis, the prophet's instruction. The Greeks made it so large that you could not bring it through your gates, ensuring it would remain outside your walls. For there is a prophecy, if the Trojans take possession of this offering to Athena, they will one day invade Greece and destroy our cities as you almost destroyed Troy. But if you damage the horse, Athena's wrath will fall upon Troy." The Trojans debated what to do with this strange gift as they escorted Sinon back to the city. Some, like Thymetes, urged bringing the horse inside as a trophy of their victory. Others, more suspicious, suggested burning it or at least examining it more carefully. Laocoon, a priest of Apollo, voiced the strongest objections. Rushing down from the citadel, he cried, "Have you lost your minds? Do you really believe the Greeks have given up and sailed away? This is surely a trick. Either there are armed men inside this thing, or it's a machine to overtop our walls, or some other deception. Whatever it is, do not trust it. To emphasize his point, Laocoon hurled his spear at the horse's flank. The hollow thud that echoed back should have confirmed his suspicions. But at that very moment, the gods intervened to seal Troy's fate. As Laocoon returned to the shore to sacrifice a bull to Poseidon, two enormous serpents emerged from the sea. With horrifying speed, they wrapped themselves around the priest and his two young sons who had joined him for the ritual. Before the eyes of the terrified Trojans, the serpents crushed the three to death, their screams cutting off as their ribs cracked in the powerful coils. Having completed their grim work, the serpents slithered away to the temple of Apollo on a citadel. The stunned Trojans interpreted this as divine punishment for Laocoon's assault on the horse. The priest was struck down for his impiety, they murmured. The horse must truly be sacred to Athena. Then came a second sign. Helen's sister-in-law Cassandra, blessed with prophetic sight by Apollo, but cursed never to be believed, ran through the streets screaming that the horse would bring destruction if brought within the walls. "Fire!" she cried. "I see fire and blood. Do not bring death into our city." But as always, her true prophecies were dismissed as madness. With these apparent divine judgments influencing their decision, the Trojans made their fateful choice. The massive horse would be brought into the city as a trophy, an offering to Athena. But the city gates were too small to admit the structure. In their eagerness, the Trojans did what 10 years of Greek siege had failed to accomplish. They breached their own walls, tearing down a section to create an opening large enough for the horse. Young men attached ropes to the wooden colossus and began the laborious process of dragging it from the beach into the city. Wheels had been attached to its base to facilitate this movement, yet still it was slow, arduous work. Crowds lined the route, singing hymns to Athena and celebrating what they believed were their deliverance from war. As the horse passed through the broken wall into Troy proper, maidens scattered flowers before it, and priests offered prayers to Athena, seeking her blessing now that her gift had been properly honored. With tremendous effort, the Trojans pulled the horse into the central plaza before the main temple, where it would stand as a monument to their survival and victory. That night, Troy erupted in the first true celebration it had known in a decade. Wine flowed freely, music filled the streets, and even the guards drank their fill. The exhausted population, released at last from the constant threat of Greek attack, abandoned themselves to revelry. As the night deepened, the sounds of celebration gradually faded, replaced by the heavy breathing of drunk, exhausted sleepers. Inside the wooden horse, the chosen Greek warriors had endured a day of cramped discomfort, barely daring to breathe as the Trojans examined their hiding place. Besides Odysseus, the hollow belly concealed Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus son of Achilles, Ajax the Lesser, and other notable fighters, the best of those who had survived the decade-long conflict. When the city finally fell silent, Sinon crept to the horse and gave the signal. From inside, Odysseus cautiously opened the hidden trapdoor in the horse's belly, and one by one, the warriors descended on ropes to the street below. They moved with practiced silence, years of warfare having taught them the art of stealth. Their first targets were the guards at the main gates, who were quickly dispatched. As those gates swung open, Sinon lit a massive signal fire on the walls, a beacon visible far out to sea, where the Greek fleet had been hiding behind a nearby island. With surprising speed, the ships that had seemed to abandon the siege returned, laden with soldiers eager for the final assault. Throughout the sleeping city, the Greeks who had hidden in the horse began their deadly work. Some, led by Neoptolemus, moved toward the royal palace. Others targeted the barracks, where what remained of Troy's fighting force lay in drunken slumber. Odysseus and Menelaus made for the house of Deiphobus, where they expected to find Helen. By the time the first Trojan citizens awoke to the sounds of combat, Greek soldiers were already pouring through the open gates and spreading throughout the city. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. The Trojans, caught completely by surprise and still half drunk from their celebration, had no chance to organize an effective defense. The Greeks, hardened by 10 years of war and remembering their many fallen comrades, showed little mercy. Houses were set ablaze, initially to provide light for their attack, but soon as a deliberate tactic to drive out hiding Trojans and create chaos. The flames spread quickly from building to building, aided by a strong wind that seemed to be sent by the gods themselves, perhaps Hera and Dan. Athena completing their vengeance against the city they had hated since Paris's judgment. King Priam, awakened by the sounds of slaughter, donned his armor for the first time in years. Though far too old to fight effectively, he was determined to die as a king. His wife Hecuba begged him to seek sanctuary at Zeus's altar, but he replied, "I have lived too long already to see my city burn and my sons die before me." His end came not in honorable combat, but in sacrilege. Neoptolemus, proving himself more savage even than his father Achilles, pursued the aged king to the very altar of Zeus. There, as Priam clutched the sacred symbols of the god, the young warrior cut him down without hesitation or respect for the holy place, an act of impiety for which the gods would later demand payment. Throughout the burning city, similar scenes of brutality unfolded. Ajax the Lesser found Cassandra clinging to the statue of Athena, seeking sanctuary in the goddess's temple. Unmoved by the sacred location or the young woman's desperate pleas, he violated her beneath the very eyes of Athena's statue. The goddess, outraged by this desecration, marked Ajax for destruction. In the house of Deiphobus, Paris's brother, who had married Helen after Paris's death, Menelaus finally confronted the woman who had been the cause, or at least the catalyst of the entire war. Some stories say Helen had already betrayed her Trojan husband, signaling to the Greeks with lamps placed in the windows. Others suggest she was as surprised as any Trojan by the night attack. Menelaus burst into their bedchamber with his sword raised, intending to kill both his wife and her new husband. Deiphobus died quickly, but when Menelaus finally stood face to face with Helen, something unexpected happened. Whether it was her legendary beauty, her skillful pleading, or some remnant of the love he had once felt for her, Menelaus found he could not strike the fatal blow. Instead, he dragged her roughly toward the ships, declaring she would face judgment back in Sparta. As dawn broke over Troy, the destruction was nearly complete. The royal palace, which had stood for centuries, was consumed by flames. The temples were looted of their treasures. The streets were filled with the bodies of the dead and the cries of the dying. Those Trojans who had survived, primarily women, children, and the elderly, were being herded toward the beach like cattle, destined for slavery in distant Greek lands. Among these captives was Andromache, widow of Hector. Her grief, already immeasurable from her husband's death, was compounded by unimaginable horror as she watched Greek soldiers take her young son Astyanax, Hector's only child, and throw him from the high walls of the city. The Greeks had decreed that no male of Priam's royal line could be allowed to live, lest he grow up to seek vengeance for Troy. Hecuba, who had been queen of the wealthiest city in Asia, was reduced to a wailing captive, her white hair matted with the ashes of her burning kingdom. She had lived to see almost all of her many children die: Paris, Hector, and so many others fallen in battle, and now her daughters dragged away to slavery. In her overwhelming grief, some accounts say, she was transformed into a howling dog, forever giving voice to her anguish. The fall of Troy was completed as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The Greeks gathered their plunder and captives on the shore, preparing to load them onto the waiting ships. The city continued to burn behind them, black smoke rising in a column, visible for miles, a funeral pyre for a civilization. Before departing, The Greeks performed funeral rites for their fallen and made offerings to the gods, some in gratitude, some in appeasement for the many impieties committed during the sack of the city. Agamemnon claimed Cassandra as his prize, a fateful choice. That would eventually lead to his own violent end. Ajax the Lesser, having offended Athena with his treatment of Cassandra, refused to make proper sacrifices, boasting that he had triumphed despite the gods' will, another act of hubris that would seal his doom. After 10 long years, the Trojan War was over. The Greeks had achieved their stated goal, Helen was recovered, Troy was punished, but at a terrible cost. Thousands of their countrymen lay buried in foreign soil. Those who survived were changed, hardened by war, and haunted by the atrocities they had committed, and for many, the true hardships were just beginning. As the Greek fleet finally departed from the smoking ruins of Troy, they could not know what awaited them. The voyage home would prove as deadly as the war itself for many. Storms sent by offended gods would scatter the fleet. Some ships would sink beneath the waves. Others would be blown far off course. Of the heroes who had set out for Troy a decade earlier, some would wander for years before seeing their homelands again. Others would return only to find treachery awaiting them. Very few would enjoy peaceful ends to their days. The destruction of Troy marked the end of an age, the twilight of heroes, the closing chapter of a more mythic time when gods walked among men and mighty warriors performed deeds worthy of song. The bards would keep these tales alive for centuries, ensuring that names like Hector and Achilles, Odysseus and Agamemnon would never be forgotten. And what of Troy itself? The city that had stood proud for centuries was reduced to smoldering. Ruins, its wealth plundered, its people enslaved or slaughtered. Yet even in destruction, it achieved a kind of immortality. Though its walls were leveled and its towers toppled, Troy would live forever in the words of poets, a cautionary tale of pride and folly, of divine caprice and human suffering, of how a single act, Paris's seizure of Helen, could unleash consequences beyond imagining. Not in time. The ruins were buried under layers of earth. New settlements were built atop the old. The physical Troy disappeared, leading some to question whether it had ever truly existed. Was it merely a poet's invention, a metaphor, a legend? For nearly 3,000 years, the location of Troy remained a mystery. Then, in the late 19th century, an amateur archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann, guided by clues in Homer's text, began excavations at a site in northwestern Turkey called Hisarlik. There he uncovered the remains of not one city, but 9, built one atop another through the centuries. One of these layers, now referred to as Troy 7, showed signs of violent destruction, dating to approximately 1250 BC, roughly the time when the Trojan War is thought to have occurred. Whether this proves the historical reality of Achilles and Hector, of Helen and Paris, remains debatable. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between myth and history, a real conflict expanded and embellished through centuries of oral tradition before Homer captured it in verse. What is certain is that the story of Troy continues to captivate us. 2. Speak to something essential about the human experience, the terrible cost of pride, the futility of war, the power of love and hatred to shape destinies. The walls of Troy have crumbled to dust. The heroes have long since departed for the Elysian fields, and even the gods of Olympus have faded into memory. Yet the echoes of that ancient conflict still resonate, reminding us that in our glories and our failings, in our capacity for both valor and savagery, we remain connected to those distant ancestors who fought and died beneath the walls of sacred Ilium. As you drift into peaceful sleep, dear listener, let your dreams carry you back to that distant time when heroes walked the earth and gods shaped the fates of mortals. May the gentle whispers of this ancient tale guide you into restful slumber, and may you wake refreshed, carrying with you the timeless wisdom that even the mightiest cities and the greatest Heroes are but temporary players on the eternal stage of human experience. Sleep well, and remember, in every ending lies the seed of a new beginning, in every tragedy the potential for wisdom, and in every ancient tale a truth that speaks across the centuries to our modern hearts.